Hello, I'm Derek Wheatley and welcome to episode 57 of the Weekly podcast. Thank you very much to Lydia Dalí last week for her episode, and we talked about music, we talked about boxing, MMA, her online boxing channel. All very interesting to me. I got some great feedback, and I hope Lydia did too. And she seemed to enjoy the episode, and so did I. So it's all good. Thank you all for your support. As ever, you've been very good for sharing our posts and stuff like that. There's a whole host of you that do it, and we can't thank you enough, because that's our way, our real, I suppose our only way at the moment to kind of get it out there. So thanks very much for that. We continue with the Live and Joyful. I recorded one last night with Leah, who was a returning guest who was with us back in, I should have checked after last night, but she was back with us about maybe episode 28, 29 roughly. And last night we got to talk about books, which was brilliant. We got to talk about music, which is always good. We got to talk about cats, because I don't like cats and Leah loves cats, and I wanted to see where the joy comes from. I still don't get it, but that's not saying I don't appreciate the love that people get from their animals and stuff like that. So it was a good chat. That's enough from me, because sometimes I waffle on. I'd like to introduce my guest today. She is an art therapist, and her name is Joanne O'Dwyer. How are you, Joanne?
Hi Derek. How are you? Lovely to be here.
Thank you very much. It was one of those episodes, Joanne, that has been set, I think, for about 3 months, maybe more, and we're finally here.
Yeah, big time. I suppose there was a lot going on. I've been super busy, kind of setting up a relatively new practice based there inside Athlone, the Dancing Soul, and so I've been busy, I guess, and trying to kind of find my feet as well, and kind of get settled in and get clients coming to me and all the rest of it as well. So, but I'm delighted to finally be able to have the chat with you today and kind of talk a little bit more about art therapy.
Correct. And I will say, before I forget, because I did have this on my mind about the Dancing Soul, it has been a well of knowledge that I've managed to pluck maybe 4 or 5 people at this stage out of the Dancing Soul. And it's an amazing place, because I came across it actually when I was going into Kieran McNally for some problems I was having with my lower back. And then I found, I think Tracy was the first one on. But it's amazing that the whole host of different therapies in there. And I think that's what it's about. It's not just one form. There's many, many forms, and we're going to talk about your one today. So first of all, we always start with a short history of your upbringing.
You've awful questions, sure. Right. Short sounds good. I definitely I had a great childhood. I can't complain. I had a very, very loving family, mom, brother and sister, who were always very supportive of everything that I did. Unfortunately, we did have, early in my life, I lost my dad when I was 5 years old. So that was, I suppose, for me, one of my earliest unfortunate experiences, and something that we had to work through as a family together, which I believe brought us closer. We're incredibly close, always have been and always will be. But yeah, I guess, that for me, unfortunately, was a big part of my childhood, working through that grief, and coming to terms with that, sudden loss. But having said that, I had great friends in school. I went to an all-girls Catholic school, in Tipperary. Sorry, I haven't mentioned that I'm from Tipperary. Just outside Tipperary town, so it's fairly not too far outside the town there, Cairn it's called, and I'm in a little boreen there, in a little passageway, and we're all there actually. My mom is there, and my brother and my sister have built there since, so they're all kind of there in their little hub, the little Dwyerville, or Spectrumville as they call it. And I suppose it's a little bit of a community, I guess, there now, and it's pretty close-knit. So, yeah, I'm missing them big time at the moment. As I said, I moved up here only recently enough, so I'm quite new to Athlone and the area and the Midlands in general. My partner's from here originally, so that's what brought us up. He's a teacher in Strokestown, County Roscommon. And he's from here, and he's come from a fairly rural background himself, so he's quite close to his family, and they've the farm there and all the rest of it. So but I suppose in general, I'd have a grow, I suppose, for Tipperary, and it'll always be a big part of who I am, and I'll always, no matter where I go, I'll always go back home, but yeah, Catholic upbringing, that whole rural Irish life that I lived, that I went to an all-girls school, nuns, all the rest of it, that would have been a big part of my upbringing. And I suppose in terms of mental health and support networks, it wasn't ideal, unfortunately. The 90s wasn't really, unfortunately. Mental health was not yet as communicated about as well as it is today in the last 10, 20 years. But, like I said, I had a really good family, a loving family, supportive family. And I think that's what always got me through, regardless. So, yeah, that's a kind of a...
Good. That's good. You mentioned...
Sure.
Yeah, you mentioned mental health there. Obviously, we always talk about this at the start. When did you first become aware of mental health?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I suppose I it's a difficult question, obviously, to target in terms of, when was there a specific time where I realized, this is what mental health is. But, I definitely on an unconscious level always struggled with mental health. Obviously, the loss of my dad definitely brought up a lot of anxiety in me. I didn't know what that was or what that meant, but it was real for me and affected a lot of things that I did, and on a daily basis. I would have had high levels of anxiety around sleeping, going to sleep. Unfortunately, he died while I was asleep. So there was this kind of an association for a long time of, that if I go to sleep, something bad's going to happen or somebody's going to die, these kind of, kind of ideas and notions and negative thought processes and around that. And, attachment stuff around, my mom, her leaving, dropping me at school. I definitely had a tough time settling in at school for a while. I thought every time that she dropped me off that she was going to die, all this sort of stuff. So I definitely suffered from mental health issues myself as part of my grief. But I suppose I didn't become aware of it until I was, coming up to my teens. So I guess maybe 12, 13, I would have experienced, unfortunately, another big loss, a sudden loss of a cousin who was kind of like a brother to us, who took his own life, unfortunately, when I think I was 13. And we would have been very, very close. Now, he would have been one of the ones now that would have definitely been a big influencer there in terms of music. He had a tough out life himself. I suppose he would have kind of moved around a lot. His parents separated. And he moved eventually to Tipperary with us, quite near the home house there, and literally lived with us, for years. My sister and brother and himself and his other brother would just sit and listen to music every day after school, and that's just what they did. Incredibly close, a huge part of our lives. So that was another huge blow. And yeah, I suppose around that time, we would have had an awareness. I suppose I was only young, so of course I was often left out of these situations. So it's they were much older than me. So, I suppose they probably always kind of had this, not that they didn't mean it in any negative way. It's not that they didn't acknowledge my involvement as well, and my own kind of grief and suffering and feelings. But I suppose they didn't know how to communicate with me about what was going on. Yet I was incredibly aware always of what was going on around me. And I suppose, that just in terms of my own work, that's a huge influencer in terms of how I work with children. Just, in terms of that non-invasive approach and the understanding that kids know a lot. From a very, very young age, kids are incredibly in tune to what's going on around them, and we don't give them enough credit for that. So, I guess there was, conversations happening around that time, of course, around, my cousin, and I obviously knew that he had taken his own life. I knew he wasn't well, he wasn't happy, he was suffering from depression. The term depression I was aware of. There was probably a lot of my own kind of figuring out going on, as opposed to somebody sitting me down and saying, look, this is what it is and this is what's happened. And because of course everybody was grieving too and suffering too in it, and I guess when you're in it, it's different in hindsight, isn't it? It's great to be a therapist where you can come in, you can say, look, it's like, take a step back here. The most important thing you can do as a family during this time while you're grieving is to be open and honest and communicate and talk to children, no matter how young they are, no matter how little you believe that they know or understand about what's going on here, that they do. And it needs to be a continuous conversation, all that sort of stuff that we know now, and I know now, and I'm able to inform other people about, we didn't know about, unfortunately. Now, having said that, we did have various supports. When my dad died, I do remember, obviously I was maybe 6 by the time, I would have been sent to a therapist of some kind. And, I don't actually know, who that was or where that was, but I do remember experiencing therapy myself for the first time at about that age. I must have been around 6. I must clarify that, but I'm pretty sure it was quite close to maybe a year after it happened. And I remember all of us went. My sister and my brother would have went as well to some form of therapy, and my mom, I believe. Now, I really don't know in terms of, how long we went, and all the details of it. But I do remember that first experience of sitting with a stranger. Like, it's so weird, isn't it? It's, for a child, it's a really unusual thing to do. It's, and obviously I knew that my dad was dead, he was gone, and that the reason I was in this place was because probably something got to do with that, so there was that awareness initially, of course, that I had, but there was also so much that I didn't understand about it, and it was weird and uncomfortable. But I remember she asked me to draw a picture of my family. And I just, like, I was only 6, but I was really angry. I was really offended. It was like, it was too much. It was this stranger asking me to draw a picture of my family when I know what this is about. It was a really uncomfortable experience for me. And it's something I took on board now, in terms of my own approach with kids now, particularly if I'm working with kids that have experienced a recent trauma. I would absolutely not ask the child to create an image which is quite obviously linked to the trauma in the first session. That's a no-no, So, I suppose there was a learning in that unconsciously, maybe for me. It's not to say that I'm sure she was a fantastic therapist and she meant well and all the rest of it. And of course, it's something that is done in therapy with children, obviously, who are grieving, and that, it can be a really useful strategy in terms of maybe looking at where they're at in terms of their understanding about this person that's lost, and, are they in the image? Are they not in the image? If they are, what are they depicted at, etc. But it's absolutely not okay to do that in the first session. So I would definitely spend as much time as possible building trust. That's huge. I would happily spend 10 sessions or more with a child who's with me for a particular issue that, yes, we would have communicated about. I'd always be very open and honest in that first session that this is why we're here and this is what we're here to potentially look at together. But I would allow the child to communicate what it is that they need to communicate to me through the art making in their own time and at their own pace.
Yeah.
So that's huge. That's really, really important.
Can I ask, because I know we're going to get into the art therapy part, but I want to continue on with yourself just for a couple more questions, because I guess these are formative things when it comes to art. Like, so where did this passion for art come from? Where did it begin?
Oh God, I don't know, Derek. Like that's another awful question.
No.
I like, look at, I have memories of being like a 5-year-old girl, like I lived in a rural area, Tipperary town, the Passage. So it was an old kind of farmhouse. We were farming background. My dad was a farmer. And I refer to the house that I grew up in as the old house, because when my dad died, we built a new house, literally just in the field across the way. And that's where I grew up really for the remainder. But I suppose I still have quite vivid memories, I guess, probably because of, the loss or whatever. I probably would have clung to memories, a lot more as a child, because I never wanted to forget my dad. So I have loads of memories of art making and playing and just being a kid, I suppose, that are still very kind of dominant in my mind for me for some reason. And I don't know, I drew a lot, like always, on the walls, everywhere. I was killed, like the place was destroyed, like that was my happy place. It was my natural place to go, and I did it regularly always, and I never questioned it. I guess it's just kind of that part of me that's just innate, I suppose. And over time, I guess, I explored various parts of that, I guess, depending on where I was. Like in school, I would have tried to master technique. So I would have been, trying to be a better drawer or trying to make things look like things, that whole kind of, that educational side of art, that kind of, perfectionistic, I guess, kind of ideological, art, idea of art. And then, I suppose on a personal level, I just would have used it for exploring emotions and thoughts. And like I would have always kept scrapbooks and diaries, and, would have doodled at home and things like that, just as a process, I suppose, really, a way of kind of figuring things out and working through stuff. So I don't know, it was just always part of me, always, naturally.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, I like to talk to or ask creative people these questions, I suppose, because I think when I write a song, right, going back to years and years, would say, like back when I was 14 or 15, write a song, and I'd have the song and I'd be like, yeah, but I'm never going to show it to anyone, like, because the bars, I think people are going to get scrapped. Did you, because you're an artist in your own right, did you have that battle going on in your head as well?
Yeah, big time. It's a huge part of it, isn't it? It's like this contrast of, it's the same in all art forms. It's like, it's like the love and the desire and the passion for it. And then there's like this, that societies, I don't know what it is, a combination of society, the education system, life in general, criticism, external criticism is everywhere. And so, it does affect your art, whatever form that is. Same with, I played guitar myself, as well. I would always be in the room doodling and, and doing my artwork or whatever. But I was also playing around with music and playing the guitar a little bit as well, like yourself. And like that, like I would have made things and I would have wrote things that I would never, ever dream of showing to the world. There was this huge criticism, and was it myself? Probably a combination of society and myself. But yeah, a huge part of it. And I guess that's the thing I like to implement into, my work. It's, of course, part of the training is that, it's not about the product. The art therapy is it's the experience. It's the, it's a way of communicating, literally. And it's not about what it looks like or how great it is or how good it is. It's anything but. And that's what I love. I love to reinforce again and again and again with my clients, particularly teenagers. Teenagers have that. Children are great. They don't have that critic. They come in and they're like, yeah, I'm doing what I'm doing, and they express themselves and they're free and it's beautiful. Then they hit like 12, 13, 14, and it becomes a completely different ball game. And a huge part of the work is that lowering down those expectations, those self-expectations of yourself, trying to break those barriers, really trying to support them in realizing that it's just a language. It's just another way of communicating, and when they get to that point, then it's like, oh yeah, there's a freedom in that then, isn't there? And then that's where the healing happens. That's where the change comes in,
I think like that idea of, like you said about the external criticism is probably hyper external criticism now with all the stuff that the teenagers have around them, and I guess another thing, the whole thing of your own worst critic, that comes in on top as well. So there's like double the kind of negative to keep it.
Yes, that's it. Yeah, that's it. Exactly. There's two of those things at play at once, isn't there?
Yeah, and it's tough, like, So Joanne, tell us what art therapy is. That's a tough question again, but I'm here for them.
Like, I hate your questions. They're awful. Okay, what is art therapy? Yeah, it's really difficult. Look, it's based on it's based on psychoanalytic theory. So it does date back historically to the 1940s, okay, in Europe, where they would have been a man called Adrian Hill. He wrote a book called Art versus Illness, and it was about the art of mentally ill people. And he first coined this term art therapy, kind of recognizing, I guess, the therapeutic benefits of art making for people who are mentally unwell. So it does date back, I suppose, to, that almost, I suppose, 100 years ago now, not too far off, a time where, psychiatry was at the forefront and, mental illness was something that was beginning to be really explored. It's also kind of coinciding with Freud and the likes of, those analytical minds, who would have been very influential in terms of medicine and mental illness and, I suppose, the interplay in various forms. And it would have been psychologically based, I guess, in that, that psychotherapy wasn't quite a practice yet, but people were starting to recognize, I guess, the importance or the relevance here of art making, because art making and the arts in general go back, prehistoric times. I mean, it's something that we've always done. As we know, we think back to the cave men and the drawings on the caves, thousands and thousands of years ago. And, we think about, music and ritual as, funerals have always involved, any big major life ritual, weddings have always involved music and movement and dance. The arts, I suppose, in general are kind of an innate form. And then I suppose it was that first kind of recognizing of that and kind of I suppose in terms of those influential minds recognizing it, it was kind of like, oh, this is great, there was something happening here. So like, I mean, it, it's I suppose it dates back, to quite, quite a time ago in one sense, but I suppose in terms of its, art therapy as being recognized today, it's not quite where it needs to be in Ireland.
Okay.
So unfortunately, like, given that it's, it's something that's been practiced, art therapy and the arts therapies for quite some time, we're still not, unfortunately, recognized as we really should be. So we're trained just like, other therapists, in that we have a master's level of education. We would have studied, various psychotherapy, and approaches and minds and processes and influencers. And, I suppose, unfortunately, there's various things at play. I suppose, we're relatively, small country. It was a practice in Britain and America. I think 1960s, 1970s, I would say, art therapy would have actually kind of taken off in America. Similar alongside Britain, with Margaret Newberg and the likes. But I suppose there wasn't any major influencers in Ireland, and so it took some time for it to really get here. And I suppose it was the UK, where, a lot of people from the UK were coming over working in Ireland and, bringing this profession over, and people were kind of like, oh, what is that? And some people went to the UK to train.
Right.
And eventually there's, I'm not sure actually what year it was, but CIT in Crawford introduced the MA. It must have been late 70s. If not the 80s, where they first introduced it. And I'd say there was only about like 10 people, do you know what I mean, on the course in the beginning. Like there was literally nobody doing it. But now, it's completely taken off. Yet we're still not where we need to be. So it's like this constant kind of trying to get the arts therapies out there, and education and all the rest. IACAT, the Irish Association for Creative Arts Therapies, that Bernadette would have talked about as well, are kind of our body, our support body in Ireland, which are wonderful. And I mean, they have loads of events happening all the time, and it's all virtual now, of course, but there's CPDs and all the rest of it happening all the time, and we're very, very involved. But unfortunately, we're still looking for recognition under CORU, which is a whole other conversation. But it just means that we're not really where we want to be just yet. So any platform like this, to be able to actually start talking about it is wonderful, and, even right now, people who could be tuning in today and kind of going, oh, what is that? Go on the IACAT website, because you have such talented therapists who work in music, drama, movement and art as a way for healing. And I suppose the beauty in it is the very fact that there's no pressure to use words. And I know words are great, and it's so important to use our words if we have them, if we're able to communicate verbally. It's a powerful tool and it's important. But some things are really difficult to communicate through words.
Yeah.
And I know that from my own personal experience. I'm sure you know that from your own personal experience. I think it's kind of it's like this idea that, trauma and difficulties, their trauma is held in the body. So it's a physical experience, that sometimes cannot be expressed cognitively. In other words, through the mind. It takes something else to access it, which is movement, music, touch, the senses.
Yeah.
So I guess, it's, hopefully we're getting there, and that people are starting to recognize that it is a thing, and it's not just for children, and it's not just for people who are nonverbal or, have an intellectual disability, or, various associations that might be coincide with the arts therapies. It's for everybody. It really is. It's a way, another way of communicating, really.
Yeah, and it's this idea that obviously I had Bernadette on, I think it was 3 weeks ago or so, and got to learn about music therapy, obviously, and we talked a bit about, I don't need to go into it again, but we talked a little bit about the idea that we're kind of ingrained towards the talking therapies because it's been there so long, but the problem is with the stuffiness, and it's kind of clinical, and the white walls. And look, I've been through the whole system in a few different places, and I've got, like I've said already, great treatment. But at the same time, had I known a bit more about art therapy, music therapy, it would probably been the route that I would have gone down initially to see where I would have got. And maybe, I don't know if you agree with this, but maybe there's a kind of a cynicism towards it because it's newer than the regular therapy,
Sure. And that's totally understandable. I guess there's, I suppose it's a lack of education, really, or, the lack of, I suppose it does go back to the recognition. So if we were statutory recognized, we would be employed in more services, in schools. We would be much more involved in the community. Right now, unfortunately, many of us are self-employed, so it's very much off our own back that we're going around going, this is our therapy, this is what we do, I swear it's great, it's understandable, of course. Of course, that's just where we are.
Yeah, that I get that. So how would someone know? And I asked this to Bernadette as well, because really for me, and obviously the other people who are listening and take it in, but how would somebody know that they're a candidate for art therapy? Is it a sense that anybody is a candidate for it? You don't need to. I suppose what I want to ask is, you don't need to be able to draw to do it.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. That's the association that's the barrier we need to break. It's absolutely not the case. It's absolutely for everybody. I suppose, children, as I say, are drawn to it, I suppose, a little bit more naturally, because it's like, ooh, that, it's play, there's that association, it's natural, it's a natural language for them. Whereas, unfortunately, as we grow up and, when we, get into our lives, and we move away from that part of ourselves, that creative part of ourselves that is innate, that is within us all. And, I suppose, so it's, I get the getting to that point where, somebody who's suffering or experiencing some difficulty as an adult, kind of moves towards the arts therapies. That's where work needs to be done in terms of informing people that absolutely you are welcome, and you can potentially heal through this process without the pressure of using words, but also with the ability to use words. So we are psychotherapists. So remember, you don't have to make any art, it's, you can just talk if you want, that's okay. Or whatever it is that you need to do with the space. But, it's the availability of that creativity that's always going to be there for you as an alternative way of processing what's going on for you.
Yeah, I do find that, and I'm sure you find the same thing. Creativity is you do expose yourself when it comes to creativity. You're open and you're out there for, like we talked about, for criticism. But for me, there's nothing more rewarding than creativity. When I, whatever it is, write a song or write a story, there's nothing more rewarding for my mental health than creativity. So that's when I'm talking to you now, and when I talk to Bernadette, the idea of it, that's when it became a great option for me, that I would be like, yeah, because I could go in there and I'd be like, okay, I can pick up a guitar and play a guitar. But if I go into Joanne and I'm very much of the mindset that I can't draw. But then it's the idea of when you look at things like expressionism, and we did have Kieran Hyland on the show. It was an expressionist artist. Right. And like he creates amazing paintings, and it's not about drawing. It's about, literally, it's in the title of expressionism, it's about expressing themselves. And I do love that. And I think that's why it would be something that would definitely be along my lines. So, you do then completely write what you want around the client, like in the sense of you figure out what the client needs, what they want to do in there. It's not just, and this is me being basic as anything, it's not just here's a pen and paper and you just fire away and draw me something. It's you cater to the needs of the client regardless.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I suppose, like there's an element of, like, I do set up the space for every client. So I do that. And it's probably part of my own ritual as well, that I feel that every client, even before I've met them, has their own space. And, so there is that, that creating of an environment, a safe environment where they feel welcomed, where they feel they can relax and be themselves. And the art materials are always part of that. The art materials will be there for them as an option. There will be a space set up. I usually have, I'd love to have a bigger space. Eventually, I'd love to have a bigger space. Right now, it's very, very small. So I do have, a couple of different environments within the room created in, kind of in anticipation to the client who I'm about to meet. So if it's a child, I am going to have some toys available. There's going to be a floor space. I'll have the teddy, the soft materials there, that kind of nourishing, nurturing, kind of element to it. If it's an adult, I'll have the table available, because often, that kind of sitting at the table is more comfortable than working on the floor. But, and then, the essential oils will be burning in a different essential oils. Look, it's probably a lot of my own, perfectionisms. I want to make sure that everybody feels at home in the space, but that changes, and quite quickly, I'll get a great sense of that person and how the space should be for that person in that first session. And through whether there's a dialogue, whether there is a conversation about the materials and about stuff that they want to explore, that they like to explore. Often there is a conversation around music that does come into it too. Some clients like to have music playing. Their own music is okay that they listen to, or a kind of a mindful kind of binaural beats, vibes, whatever it is for them, can be important to hold them within the space too. And others might like silence, and that might be really important for them as well. So, I guess going back to your question, I can't actually remember your question now. What did you actually ask?
It wasn't a good one. To be honest, it was basically it was about how you basically answered the question for me there. It was just about how you cater for each client, and obviously with the setup that you've spoken about, that's it really. And you talked a little bit about fabrics and things there, and I just want to talk, because you do have an expertise in autism spectrum disorder. How helpful is it for people on the autistic spectrum? How helpful is art therapy for them?
It's incredibly powerful, actually. Yeah. for all ages too. I mean, I'm working with clients, adult clients too, with autism, and it's very different in terms of my approach, and like it is with everybody, every individual is different, but it's that other way of communicating. So it's that availability of, a conversation, a non-verbal conversation through the art making. And I suppose, for the little ones, in terms of, sensory, the sensory element to that, often you'll have children who have, over sensory processing. So they would find stimuli really overwhelming. So kind of refrain from the mess. So I'd be very mindful of that in my intake. I'd be asking questions around, how is their sensory, experience? What is their, what are the materials that they might be, disgusted by, or, uncomfortable with. So I would refrain from having like messy, too much clay, Play-Doh, those messy materials. I would be paring back, and I'd have more dry based materials. And then you might have the child that, really works well with that sensory stimulation. So, that, as many of those kind of materials available as possible in the space would be really important there. And it's very natural in terms of how, what it is that they need in that space and in that time, and with those materials. And it varies from, client to client, depending on their reason for referral as well. So in terms of what it is that we, need to start looking at here, what is the issue, what is the difficulty that we're having, whether it's at home in a family situation, whether it's in school, whether it's on an emotional level, whether there's, feelings or thoughts or anxieties. Anxiety can be a huge area with ASD. So, often, from my experience so far, it is around managing high levels of anxiety and finding a way to self-regulate through the art making. And I suppose the idea is that, they both can communicate what it is that they're feeling to me, in that safe space around their high levels of anxiety. In the experiencing of the high levels of anxiety in the session with me, and sitting with that, and being present in that with them, or the taking something home with them, so the idea of potentially experiencing something helpful in the session that soothes and nourishes them in some way, shape or form, and potentially taking that home with them and incorporating it into their daily lives. So it's incredibly varied, I suppose, in terms of how the art making can be useful for, children and individuals with ASD. It's just as unique as it is for everybody, in terms of what it is that they actually get from it. But there is absolutely that power of being able to communicate, which often is difficult for people on the spectrum.
So let me just get this ad in here, because I forgot about it, and then I normally have it in already. See, we were having such a good chat. The flow was going. It's good. That's So, Fusion Training Centre, Monksland Athlone, a place to train in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, kickboxing, martial arts and CrossFit. Great atmosphere with experienced coaches and a real sense of community. If you want to join the team, find us on Facebook at Fusion Training Centre, or drop in for a chat. Fusion Training Centre, train like a warrior. That was flawless. That's that done. So now we move back to the questions. There's another thing, another part of it that I was very interested in. I was reading up on, and you also work with people who have physical and intellectual disabilities.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, sorry, go ahead.
No, it was just basically the how it impacts their lives and helps with the difficulties they're experiencing.
Yeah, well, as I say, unfortunately, I don't have anybody currently with a physical disability right now, which is unfortunate. And I think a lot of it is the fact that I'm in private practice, and because of COVID, I'm not able to move around to centres right now and actually plonk myself into a service centre or a school environment and actually, physically come into their environment and support them in that way right now, which I love. And I will, I absolutely can't wait to be able someday to get back to that. And there is that kind of stigma, I guess, with private practice, with particularly with the people with physical disabilities, that, in terms of access, there is where I'm, there is access right now where I am in the Dancing Soul. There's an elevator there for wheelchair users, but I guess, it's not set up with disabilities in mind initially. So there is a little bit of work that could perhaps go into that in the future around kind of being able to support that. But I do think there is a beauty of being able to actually come into their their environment, so that the day service, the school environment, it's so wonderful to have an art therapist or an arts therapist to come into that and kind of change the dynamic, I guess, a little bit in one would be one aspect to it, but also that kind of, that ability to work in a group setting as well, and potentially look at stuff that's actually, or issues or difficulties that are actually being experienced on a daily, on site. So, I suppose the while I'm there, and of course I would absolutely, do my utmost to provide a supportive and safe environment to work with somebody with a physical disability right now in private practice. I guess there are a couple of more hurdles to overcome before I would feel confident enough with kind of advertising that. But, as I say, there is a power, and I know that, Bernadette, the music therapist, would be similar in that she has gone around to services and schools and worked on site, and there's something even on a personal level. Private practice is quite isolating, so you find that it's wonderful. And as you said, Dancing Soul, where I am, is wonderful in that there's such variety and diversity of practices going on in there, and everybody's so respectful and all the rest of it. But there's definitely, a grow for me of working in school environments and centres, and actually being able to move into those very real, kind of, I suppose, realities of daily life for people, as opposed to taking them out of it, if that makes sense. So hopefully it's something that will happen again. I think it'd be wonderful to be able to go back, into those environments. They are starting to go back to school, thankfully, next week. From Monday now, they're slowly but surely starting to go back. The special schools are back, which is wonderful. That was a huge, it was a slow one, and I suppose politically a little bit controversial one. It took probably a little bit longer than many would have liked, but it did happen, and it is continuing to happen. So that there's definitely something happening. There's a shift right now, I feel, that's feeling positive, and we will get there. We'll be back to, the arts therapist will be back, hopefully, being able to go into these environments again, because there is such power in that. There is there's a lot of work that can be done in that capacity.
So there's another thing I mentioned this obviously before we started recording about CBT techniques that you bring to it, but you told me that there's actually a lot more than that you bring to it. It's when someone, I guess what I mean is, when someone sees the word art, they think drawing, painting, and those things, but there's a lot more than that too. You mentioned music being part of it as well, but you talked about movement as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose it's that body-based approach that I would have anyway. A kind of an interest and an understanding naturally of the arts as kind of being one and very much of the body. So yeah, like, I mean, for some, particularly with the ASD children and the ADHD, movement would be actually a really important part of settling into the room, settling into the environment. Because there can be that transitional piece of coming from home or the car or wherever they've been and coming into this new space. So, there's a wonderful power of incorporating movement into that as a part of processing this new environment, if that makes sense. So yeah, I would incorporate stretches. Sometimes can be a lovely way, even just like, a sigh, a big deep breath in and it's like letting go of something, it's that kind of physical release that so wonderfully is captured in that movement. And then sometimes it might be, as I do yoga myself personally anyway, almost every day. I've done it for years now. So sometimes just naturally I might incorporate a couple of moves, on the mat, and we'd work on a mat anyway a lot of the time, rather depending on what's set up in terms of rather through play, but I would also always, have a space available to be able to move if possible. So yeah, sometimes, bits of yoga can be introduced, breathing, mindfulness exercises can be introduced. I suppose, those simple techniques with children that can be really powerful, like, the hot chocolate breath, that you imagine that you're holding a big, and I use it myself, a big warm hot chocolate, and you give it a big smell into your nose, and then you blow it, you try and cool it down as best you can with a big blow out through your mouth. And it's such a simple little technique, but it's a beautiful grounding one in coming out of the head, and perhaps some feelings around anxiety, and then coming into the body, into the present moment. Yeah. So yeah, the incorporation of various techniques is important as a therapist. It's obviously my training was around the art making and focus on the image, and there's so much work that can happen in that. But I think as a therapist, and just if you want to really be able to help someone, you have to be open to the varieties of other things that are helpful for people. And there are so many things today that we're aware of, thankfully, and so much more talk and information around exercise, the importance of exercise and movement, and eating well and staying hydrated, and we're not shy about it anymore, which is wonderful. We're not scared to say we're looking after our mental health, which is so positive. You can never talk too much about it, so there's so many things now that we can draw. And I think it's important to do that as a therapist, to incorporate those techniques.
That's probably the end of your difficult questions, I think.
Yay!
Actually, sometimes I've started throwing, actually, the Bernadette episode was the one where I started throwing these questions in at the end, and then I was kind of like, they're a bit of fun, but they're tough for the person to put them on the spot, but there's no right or wrong answer, so that's a good thing. Do you have a favorite art movement?
I knew you were going to ask me something like that. No, I just don't, Derek, because, and it's just, and I'm the same with music. If you want to ask me my favorite music, I can't do it because it changes every day. It changes with my life and where I am in my life, and I just can't commit. I die. Because I listen back to this in a year's time and I'll go, what the hell? No, I'm not doing it. I don't have one.
Okay, let me just scribble out the next 4 questions. Yeah, they're all gone. That's gone. That one's gone. Okay, I won't ask you who your favorite. I won't ask you your favorite artist is, right? But I do think that I think we can do it in a slightly different way. So,
Okay.
because it's something that obviously you've been doing for most of your life, art, drawing, like you said, even you said doodling and things like that. Was there ever a moment where you remember, and I've spoken about this quite a bit, your first time noticing an artwork? It can be a very famous piece, it can be Mona Lisa, the most famous of all, or it can be something where you kind of went, shit, that looks, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, like, God, that's actually a really good question. But what came to mind, just as you asked me that, just naturally, instinctively, was The Persistence of Time by Salvador Dali.
Mm.
Do you know that one?
I do, yeah, yeah.
Oh my God. I remember seeing that, obviously not in real life, a picture of it in a book in school, and just going, oh my God, he was my favorite
Mm.
artist in
Yeah.
school for a while. And yeah, like, even now, I mean, his work is beautiful, isn't it? It's like, it's crazy. It's the surrealist movement. So it's that kind of dreamlike imagery that we all on some level relate to. Oh, there's my battery going now. I'm going to have to charge the phone.
All right. I you can keep talking there anyway.
Yeah, that one. That's the one for me that comes to
Yeah.
mind. Yeah. What about yourself?
Well, first on the persistence of time, there's a wonderful conversation when I had with Kieran Hyland, and he was I asked him about famous artists and things like that, and he dismissed the persistence of time as melty clocks and things. But the reason he said it was he sees this stuff in his imagination, so it doesn't surprise him when he sees it in the painted form, which I thought was a very interesting way of looking at art. He is an expressionist, so it's slightly different movement he's part of. For me, and I have talked about this, for me it's always Edvard Munch. It's always the Scream. Every time I look at the Scream, I've got a print inside. I'm startled by how great it is. And I've the thing I've read about Munch, and I love his work. I take a lot from it, probably because I know this, but it may not because of this. But he did deal with a lot of depression and a lot of anxiety and stuff. And I can see it in his pictures. I can see it not just in the screen, but in so many of his pictures, this kind of darkness to him, and he wasn't the most talented of artists. He wasn't precise in his brushstrokes or anything like that, but there was just an amazing amount of feeling in his paintings. And so I find it hard to look past him, but Dalí is unreal as well. Like, I couldn't argue with that.
But they're all beautiful in their own right, aren't they? There's so much out there, that have their own, and it's like that with all of the arts, isn't it? It's like, it's like that with music. It's like categories of music. I love all categories of music. I love all, movements of art, depending on, where I am, what connects, what I feel connected to in that moment, almost, isn't it? And that changes all the time, because we change all the time. Yeah.
And I don't think there can't be enough of it, when it comes to music and art and anything within the art sphere. There can't be enough of it, because we do change and we move between, when I was a kid, like, I was huge Guns N' Roses. Now, I listen to the odd thing now, but I'd still find them a little bit naff now. I'd be like, I don't know. But it's just because I grew up and I started listening to maybe more sophisticated. I know that's a bit of a, snobbish kind of way to put it, but a more sophisticated. What?
What would you say now is more sophisticated?
I guess what I mean by sophisticated is more sophisticated melodies and the way things are written. And I always go back to the Beatles, but there is a lot of examples of that kind of songwriting, Radiohead, and where there seems to be more to it. The lyrics mean more. It's not about like getting drunk on Night Train. There's a lot of different
Okay.
ways. And again, look, I've been called a music snob. I've been called a film snob. Haven't been called an art snob yet, but I'm working on that. I'm gonna get if I get the hat trick, I'm gonna be thrilled. But anyway, that's enough about me. What else do you like to do in your spare time, Joanne?
Yeah, so as I said, I love yoga. That's a really big part of I try every day to do at least a half an hour. I love walking. I love, I 3 times a week at least, I always try to go out for a nice hour walk, just mentally in terms of keeping me well. Like, I mean, I've such a hectic life. I'm always working on something. And, I suppose I definitely like experience overwhelm quite regularly. So I need to regulate. It's a really important part of for all of us, I guess. We all need to have our little. So yeah, movement, like moving, being active is really important for me. Like prior COVID, it'd be, being with people as well would be important. That's been really difficult for me. I really miss people. And I'm missing my family a lot as well. But, look, we have technology, don't we? And we're doing our best to keep in touch and stay positive around that. But yeah, definitely be connecting with people as much as possible. Will be something that's important for me. I love movies. I love watching movies. I miss the cinema big time. Really miss the cinema. And yeah, like music would be a big part of my just every day as well. I always spend time some stage of the day, whether it's in the morning, driving, listening to music, just purely for pleasure. Yeah, like loads of stuff. Animals, I adore animals. I have I have a fantasy that someday I'm going to have a kind of a farm / therapy center. So I'm going to incorporate the animals into the therapy. And people think I'm mad, but llamas and alpacas in particular are actually a wonderful therapy pet. Anyone who knows me now is laughing, I know that. But they are a very relaxing therapy pet that have been used, for example, in nursing homes. They've been brought into different places. Luckily enough, I got to go on a trek with them there last summer, myself and my fiance. We went up to the Wild Alpaca Way, and we walked with like a herd of alpacas, and it was absolutely beautiful. And I was absolutely bombarding your man, trying to figure out how do you, where do you get them, trying to find out all about them. So someday I have a fantasy that I'm going to have some kind of an animal retreat type therapy center where we can incorporate the animals and nature into the therapy process, into the art making process.
Nice.
That's another. It's like, it's not but that's another kind of fantasy of mine. But yeah, so like animals, I've got 2 cats, and
I gave out about cats last night. I'm not going to give out about cats again.
Like cats? Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Well, look, they're very independent animals. Like, they don't really care that much about you, so I can see how you mightn't like them very much. They're out for themselves. Like, I can see that.
Can I say, Joanne, just because this is one thing that I noticed when you were listing the things that you like to do in your spare time. And I spoke to my mom about this recently, and this is not by the way, this is not me having to go previous guests. But what happens, and this would happen to me too, by the way, if somebody asked me what I like to do, I would reel off a load of things, and I would forget to say people. I would forget to say, connection with people, how I like to connect with people. And and it can be family, it can be friends, it can be strangers, it can be, all kinds. But I was talking to my mom about it, and it's one of these things that I've been trying to bring into the conversation, maybe like kind of in a cumbersome way. But I didn't have to with you brought it up, so that was quite a nice touch, and it's just something I wanted to know, because a lot of people probably would say it, but it's when the question is kind of formed, I suppose it does just sound like something what do you do? Oh, I do yoga, I do music. So it's very
active based. Yeah, that's true, isn't it? Yeah.
It's good. You're looking longingly there away into the distance on the camera. But it's yeah. Look,
The weather is lovely today,
it
Derek. I'm
is.
really excited. It's been awful. The winter has been really difficult. January was it always is anyway, isn't it? January is always a really, really long month, but this January was very, very long and dark and miserable. So it's just so lovely to see the sunshine. I'm really excited about the sunshine. It's lovely, and it's Sunday as well, so it's great.
There is a lovely feeling that, you know, I didn't get it when I was younger. I really like rain. I just find it quite soothing, whatever it is about it, the noise, whatever.
Oh,
But
yeah.
I do think that people change so much when the sun comes out, and it's I think people, especially now, people need it. So even talking to my dad about it and my mum about it, and I live in my landlady downstairs talking about how it does change mood. So it is something we kind of need right now.
Oh, yeah.
Joanne, where can people find you?
So I have my Facebook and Instagram page, relatively new, but I try to be fairly consistent on it every day or a couple of times a week anyway. Art Therapy with Joanne. My website is www.arttherapywithjoanne.ie. Now, don't laugh at the name. It's because it's clear and direct, and you'll remember it.
Yeah.
So that, that's the idea, like it's not that I couldn't be arsed, thinking of a really cool, interesting name. It's genuinely because I think that people will actually remember it. So Art Therapy with Joanne. Same for the email, arttherapywithjoanne@gmail.com, and my number there as well. Will I read out my number? Will I say out my number, or will I leave you to have a look at the website there for that?
Totally up to yourself.
And what else am I? That's it, really. I'm not on YouTube or anything else like that. I try to be fairly, present online as best I can anyway. I have to manage it. I think we all have to manage it ourselves at the moment, because we are craving connection so much. It can be kind of that go-to, can't it? The place to go to artificially connect with people, but you're not really connecting with people, and then you just get exhausted. So you have to kind of, I try to manage it as best I can. How much I am also trying to be fairly present and consistent as well with posts and stuff like that. So I'm delighted to hear from people. Sure.
Exactly. It's been a pleasure chatting to you. I really appreciate you giving over some of your time on a Sunday afternoon.
Not at all. Thank you, Derek, so much. I think the podcast is amazing. The work that you're doing is amazing, and it's just so important to have a platform to be able to talk about mental health. And obviously the opportunity today to be able to talk about art therapy as well. So I appreciate it very much, Derek. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm learning so much with each episode, and it was really nice to learn about art therapy today, something I didn't know a lot about. Stick with me for 1 minute, Joanne, until I get through these, and I just want to take a photo with you at the end, all right?
Great, yeah.
So thank you very much to John. I will say, John, 1 hour late last week on Wednesday, the episode, and I think we've all learned something from it, especially you, I hope. No, I'm kidding, but at the same time, come on. Thanks very much to my mother, my father, my granddad, Jer and Calvin, for the art and the music, respectively. Our YouTube channel is up there. You'll find the Wheatley. Subscribe if you would. Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, we're all on there as the Wheatley. Again, as Joanne said about her name, ours is the Wheatley. It's literally my name and how often it happens. So it's not exactly, we're not exactly coming up with some great stuff here. But we're on Spotify, Apple, Anchor, Google Podcasts, all those ones like that. Again, Joanne, thank you. And thank you to everyone for listening. And go look up Joanne's pages, and if it fits, do it. We'll talk to you next week at some point. Well, it'll be Wednesday. Take care of yourselves, and we'll talk to you soon, okay? Bye.